The evening air in Strasbourg had a way of sneaking under your skin, a quiet, insistent chill that reminded you that winter was never truly forgiving. I pulled my coat tighter, hugging my arms around myself as I walked along the narrow cobblestone streets, the uneven stones glinting under the scattered glow of streetlights. Snow had begun to fall, light at first, like delicate feathers drifting lazily from the gray sky, then, thicker, heavier, sticking to my hair, my scarf, and the edges of my coat. My breath formed small clouds in front of my face, and each exhale felt like a whisper of vulnerability. And then, I saw him. Julian, my grandson, barely 16, yet carrying a swagger that made him look taller than he was. He had his hood pulled low over his face, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, and a half-smile that did not reach his eyes. When I stumbled slightly on a patch of ice, he paused, looked back, and let out a short, sharp laugh. "Don't be so sensitive, Grandma," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet evening, more cruel than casual. He laughed again, harsh and brittle, the sound echoing off the walls of the surrounding buildings. And then he kept walking, leaving me there, frozen in more than just the cold. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to grab his arm, to shake him lightly and ask him what had happened to the little boy who used to hide behind my skirts when strangers came too close. But I didn't. Something in his expression, the rigid tilt of his shoulders, the way his jaw was set, told me that words might not reach him tonight, or maybe, ever again. I walked after him, slower than I wanted, shivering violently despite my layers. The warm golden light of a nearby cafe glowed like a beacon across the street, but he didn't turn toward it, didn't seem to notice. He just moved forward, step by careful step, as if he were practicing leaving me behind, rehearsing the moment. I realized I had lost him in ways I hadn't yet understood, that as I followed, memories began to surface, sharp and insistent. Camille, my daughter, laughing when I tried to correct her grammar at age 12, her eyes sparkling with mischief. The long evenings when she refused to speak to me, slamming doors, leaving me with my questions and my guilt. And now Julian, who had always been a bridge to her, a living reminder of our connection, had become a wall instead. A wall I couldn't climb, couldn't break, no matter how much I wanted to. I tried to remember the last time he had smiled at me, without that sharp edge, and it hurt more than the cold. I thought of his tiny hands in mine when he was 3, how he used to giggle at my ridiculous accents when I read him bedtime stories about the old village where Camille and I had grown up. That little boy had trusted me completely. And now, I barely recognized him. My thoughts tumbled over themselves, a chaotic mess of guilt, fear, and shame. Had I done something wrong? Had I spoiled him too much? Was it Camille's influence, her constant complaints and criticisms, that had taught him to mock me? Or was it simply that he had grown up, and I had been left behind? The streets were empty except for a few scattered pedestrians and the occasional car that hissed past, tires throwing slush onto the sidewalks. The smell of baked bread from a nearby boulangerie mingled with the cold, sharp scent of winter air. I wished I could forget the feeling of his laughter echoing in my chest, like a cruel soundtrack I couldn't escape. And then the first tear slid down my cheek, not just from the cold, though it was biting, but from the realization that the person I had loved and nurtured, the one I had thought I could protect from the world's harshness, had chosen to leave me behind, not out of malice perhaps, but out of indifference. Or worse, out of habit. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe, Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I shivered violently, my scarf barely protecting me. Julian had turned the corner, and I had no choice but to follow. With each step, I felt the cold creeping deeper, into my bones, into my heart. And with each step, I realized I wasn't just following him through the snow, I was following a trail of memories, of moments I had thought were ours forever. The snow began to fall heavier, clinging to my eyelashes, to my hair, to my coat, until I looked like a figure in a winter painting, fragile and small against the stark, unforgiving city. I remembered the afternoons when Julian used to sit on my lap and beg me to tell him stories of my youth, of the secrets of our family, the whispered tales of triumphs and betrayals that Camille had never wanted to hear. I had thought those stories would keep us close forever. But stories are fragile. Memories can be reshaped, and people, even those you love most, can change. He stopped briefly, looking over his shoulder with that same smirk. "Hurry up, Grandma, you're so slow." And just like that, the barrier between us seemed absolute. I realized then that this wasn't about the cold, or the snow, or the empty streets. It was about the years of small neglects, of misunderstandings, of moments where I had chosen my pride over patience, or my fear over forgiveness. I caught myself whispering under my breath, not sure if I wanted him to hear or not. "You're not the boy I used to know, but I won't stop loving you, even if you leave me behind." And that's when it hit me with full force. I had spent decades protecting my family from the world, from mistakes, from shame, but no one had ever prepared me for this, the quiet, bitter betrayal of being abandoned by the one I had believed would always be my bridge to the next generation. Julian wasn't just leaving me in the cold. He was showing me, with every step, that I had already been left behind in ways I hadn't fully understood, and yet, I followed, because a grandmother doesn't give up, not on her child, and not on her grandson, no matter how unkind the world or they can be. The streetlights flickered as I followed Julian through the twisting streets of Strasbourg, my boots crunching on the thin layer of ice that had formed over the cobblestones. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, not just from the weight of my coat or the sting of the winter air, but from the memories that clung to me as stubbornly as the snowflakes. I couldn't understand what had made him this way, or, maybe, deep down, I did. As I walked, my mind wandered back to Camille, my daughter, and the long, complicated path that had led to this moment. I remembered her first day of school, her tiny hand in mine, and the way she had looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. She had been a quiet child, careful and deliberate in her words, but fiercely determined in her actions. I had loved her with every fiber of my being, and yet, somehow, I had failed to anticipate the distance that would grow between us. There had always been small fissures in our relationship, arguments over grades, over manners, over things that seemed trivial at the time. But those fissures had widened over the years, deepening into a canyon of unspoken resentment. I had tried to bridge it with kindness, with patience, with stories of my own childhood in a small French village, where life had been harder, but love had been constant. Camille had smiled politely, but I had always felt a wall rising between us, brick by brick, until I realized one day that I had been talking to someone I no longer knew. And now Julian was standing on the same ground, his small acts of defiance, the smirk, the laughter, the casual disregard, the tension I had once felt with Camille. It was a cruel reflection of the past, and I wondered, not for the first time, if history was doomed to repeat itself. Stopped for a moment, leaning against a lamppost, my hands numb despite my gloves. The warmth of the cafe across the street seemed like a distant memory, a dream I could almost reach but never quite grasp. I thought about the times I had held Julian close, the nights I had stayed up reading him stories when Camille had been too busy with work to care. How had it come to this? How had love turned into silence, and laughter into cruelty? As the snow fell thicker, I felt a pang of fear, not just for myself, but for the boy I had once nurtured. I remembered the afternoons when he had told me secrets, innocent fears about school, whispered dreams of becoming an artist or a musician. Small confessions that had seemed so monumental at the time. Those moments were gone now, replaced by a guarded silence and a coldness I didn't recognize. I thought about the last time Camille had called me, her voice tight with frustration. She had been upset about money, about my interference in her life, about the way I had insisted on hosting family dinners she claimed were unnecessary. She had shouted at me, her words sharp and cutting, and then hung up. I had sat there, staring at the receiver, wondering where the love had gone, and feeling an ache in my chest that refused to fade. And now, Julian, her son, was mirroring the same patterns. It was as if the coldness had been passed down, like a family heirloom no one had wanted but no one could escape. I felt the weight of generations pressing down on me, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the unspoken grievances, and I wondered if I had ever truly known my family at all. The streets grew narrower, the buildings older, and the snow deeper. I could see the silhouette of an old church at the end of the lane, its stone walls dark and imposing. Julian paused at the steps, looking back at me once more with that infuriating, knowing smirk. "Really, Grandma," he said, his voice carrying just enough mockery to pierce the cold night, "you're so dramatic. You're freezing, and yet you keep following me." I wanted to tell him how much it hurt, how much fear and sadness had followed me every step of the way. But the words caught in my throat, tangled in the frost and the snow. Instead, I swallowed hard and kept walking, feeling the cold seep into my bones, but refusing to give up. as I approached, I noticed something strange. The doors of the church were slightly ajar, creaking gently with the wind. A faint light spilled from inside, casting long shadows on the snow-covered steps. Julian stepped inside without hesitation, and I hesitated, feeling a sense of unease I couldn't explain. I remembered stories Camille had told me when Julian was little, about a family secret, a mystery that had been buried long before I was born, something about her father, my ex-husband, and a hidden truth that had shaped our lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. Could this be connected? Could Julian somehow know more than he let on? And was he leading me here for a reason I couldn't yet fathom? The thought made my chest tighten, a mix of fear and anticipation swirling inside me. I took a deep breath, pushing the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty nave. The warm air inside felt different from the outside cold, a deceptive comfort, as if it were hiding something darker beneath its glow. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, and there he was, Julian, standing at the altar, his expression unreadable. And then I noticed the envelope in his hands, a small, unassuming thing, yet somehow heavy with significance. I froze. That envelope, I knew that shape, that crease. It was the kind of envelope that carried secrets, truths no one wanted to face. And suddenly, I realized that this was no ordinary evening, no ordinary confrontation. Julian wasn't just leaving me in the cold, he was holding a revelation that could change everything. The snow continued to fall outside, silent and relentless. As I took a cautious step toward him, my heart pounded with a mixture of dread and hope. Somewhere inside me a voice whispered, "This is it, the truth. Whatever it is, it's finally coming out." And I understood, in that moment, that the journey through generations of pain, misunderstandings, and silence was only just beginning. The envelope trembled slightly in Julian's hands, though his expression remained stoic, unreadable, as if he were rehearsing this moment for months. My chest tightened at the sight. I could feel the weight of history pressing down, each heartbeat, a reminder of mistakes, misunderstandings, and words left unsaid. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "You need to see this." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to see what he had brought, what hidden truths were now dangling before me like fragile glass. But something deep inside, a stubborn need to understand, to connect, to bridge the chasm that had grown between us, pushed me forward. Slowly, I stepped closer, careful not to rush, careful not to startle him. The church smelled of old wood and wax, faint incense lingering as though time itself had refused to erase it. The snow outside continued to fall, muffling the world beyond these walls, creating a suspended bubble in which only we existed. He handed me the envelope with a deliberate, almost ceremonious gesture. My hands shook as I took it, fingers brushing against his. A spark of the old warmth the boy I had loved flared inside me, but I quickly suppressed it, bracing myself for the unknown. Inside was a stack of photographs, letters, and documents, yellowed at the edges, some written in delicate cursive that I immediately recognized as Camille's father's handwriting. My ex-husband, whose absence had haunted our family for decades, whose silence had left cracks in our lives that no words could fill. I sank onto a nearby pew, the wood cold beneath me, and began to sift through the contents. Each paper, each photograph, was a shard of a life I thought I knew. A photo of Camille as a child, sitting on her father's lap, smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow, a hint of fear I had never noticed before. Letters detailing financial struggles, secrets kept from me, sacrifices made in silence. And then, at the very bottom, a small, folded note, written in a trembling hand, to the family I could not protect, to the love I left behind. One day, the truth will matter. Please forgive me for the burdens I left. My hands went cold. I had spent years blaming myself, blaming Camille, blaming the circumstances that had shaped our fractured family. And yet here was a man, absent from our lives, leaving behind an invisible chain of consequences that we had all inherited. Julian watched me silently, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I wanted to ask him why. Why now? Why this way? Why the cold, the distance, the laughter that had cut me so deeply just hours ago? "Why are you showing me this?" I asked finally, my voice shaking. Julian's eyes softened, just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the boy I once knew, buried beneath layers of teenage defiance. Because, Grandma, he said, voice steady, I needed you to know. I needed you to see that it wasn't just you. It wasn't just Camille. It was all of us. And I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to show you I was angry for reasons I didn't fully understand. The words cut through me, not with malice, but with raw honesty. The truth was not simple, not clean, not easily untangled, but it was there, and it was heavy. As I looked at Julian, I remembered the small boy who had once clung to me for safety, who had asked me endless questions about the world and about life, who had believed in me without hesitation. And I realized, painfully, that beneath the hardened exterior, he still needed me. He was acting out not out of cruelty, but out of confusion, fear, and inherited pain. The church around us was silent, save for the soft echo of our breaths and the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. It felt as though the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for a resolution, waiting for understanding. I leaned back, staring at the envelope, the letters, the photographs, the tangible weight of decades of family history, and I understood, suddenly, that Julian's laughter on the street had not been cruelty, had been armor, a way to shield himself from truths too big, too heavy, too complicated for a 16-year-old to bear alone. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, almost to myself, we've all been walking around with ghosts, haven't we? Julian nodded, silent, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I reached out and took his hand. The warmth of his skin against mine was shocking in its intimacy, a reminder that beneath the walls, the secrets, the misunderstandings, there was still a bond, fragile but unbroken. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. We sat there together in silence, the envelope between us like a bridge, connecting past and present, mistakes and forgiveness. I thought about Camille, about her pain and her anger, about the years of distance between us, and I realized that understanding was the first step toward healing. But healing required more than understanding, it required courage, confrontation, and sometimes the willingness to face the cold truth, even when it shivered through your bones. Julian finally spoke again, quietly. I don't want to lose you, Grandma. I didn't know how else to make you see. His words broke something open inside me, a door that had been closed for years, allowing a flood of empathy, sorrow, and love to pour through. I understood, finally, that family pain was not about blame, it was about survival, about navigating the wounds passed down through generations, about learning to forgive both ourselves and others. And in that moment, I promised silently, not just to Julian, but to myself, that I would walk beside him, no matter how cold the streets, no matter how cold the streets, no matter how heavy the past. That promise, fragile yet unshakable, was the first warmth I had felt in years. The church air felt heavy around us, thick with candle smoke and the quiet tension of unsaid words. Julian had retreated to the far end of the pews, his eyes flicking nervously to the envelope that still rested between us, as though the papers themselves were capable of holding secrets far too dangerous to speak aloud. I sat frozen, my mind racing, my body shivering, not just from the lingering winter chill, but from the storm of emotions flooding me. I remembered a time long ago, years before this moment of bitter revelation. Camille was younger, her laughter, bright and spontaneous, often echoing through our small apartment in Lyon. There had been warmth, a sense of security that only a mother and daughter can share. But slowly, the warmth had turned into tension, subtle at first, like a thin fog that rolls over a valley and refuses to lift. Disagreements over school, friends, or trivial household rules had slowly morphed into a wider chasm, filled with silent accusations and misunderstood intentions. And now, all these years later, that same tension had manifested in Julian, her son, a boy I had hoped would be the bridge to reconciliation. I shook my head, trying to banish the memories, but they clung stubbornly. I thought of Camille's wedding, years before Julian's adolescence, when I had been seated awkwardly in the corner, watching her dance with her new husband. I had smiled politely when family and friends congratulated me, but inside, I had felt a pang of loneliness that refused to dissipate. That night, I had realized the first time that Camille might never see me as a confidant or as a pillar in her life, despite everything I had given. And now, Julian, the weight of generations pressed down on me in a way that made the wooden pew beneath me feel impossibly small. as though it could not bear the combined burdens of mistakes, secrets, and the relentless passage of time. Grandma, Julian whispered, his voice breaking the silence, I didn't mean for it to go this far, but I can't keep pretending I understand what's going on, Camille. She's hiding things from you, from everyone. I looked up sharply, startled by the bluntness of his words. Hiding things. What are you talking about? My voice trembled, a mix of anger and fear. Julian hesitated, his eyes shifting away, tracing patterns in the worn stone floor. It's about the money, about the house, the inheritance. She's made choices that affect all of us, but she never told anyone, not even you. I froze, a chill deeper than any winter wind settling in my chest. Camille's choices had always been mysterious to me, but I had never imagined that the consequences could be this severe. My thoughts spun back to her recent calls, her clipped tones, the way she had avoided discussing certain family matters. Could it be that she had manipulated situations for her benefit while leaving the rest of us in the cold? My hand shook as I reached for the letters and photographs again, sifting through them in a desperate attempt to understand what Julian meant. I noticed subtle inconsistencies in the documents, small discrepancies in dates, amounts, and signatures. The deeper I looked, the more I realized that Camille had been orchestrating events, quietly, carefully, while I had remained oblivious, distracted by daily routines, by small worries, by love I thought was enough. Julian's voice broke into my spiraling thoughts. Grandma, you have to see this. He held out a photograph, worn and creased at the edges. It was Camille, standing in front of an unfamiliar bank, signing papers with a calm, almost cold determination. A man, who I assumed was her lawyer, watched over her shoulder. The expression on her face was unreadable, detached, a mask I had never seen in her before. I felt my throat tighten. Why didn't she tell me? The words were almost a whisper, but heavy with pain. I realized then that Camille had been living a life I was never allowed to glimpse fully, a life shaped by secrecy, ambition, and perhaps fear of my disapproval. Julian sat beside me, placing a hand on my arm, his presence grounding me in the storm of revelations. She wanted to protect you, in her own way, but in doing so, she kept you out. She thought you wouldn't understand. Maybe she was right, maybe she didn't. I looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I had loved, not the hardened teen, but the child who had clung to my skirts in the rain, who had whispered fears and dreams with absolute trust. Julian, I said softly, sometimes protecting someone doesn't mean leaving them in the dark. It means letting them in, even when it's hard. He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes, but he didn't speak. We sat there, surrounded by the quiet grandeur of the old church, the snow muffling the world outside, absorbing our grief, our confusion, our shock. I thought of Camille again, of her choices and secrets, of the ways she had shielded herself, and us, from truths she feared we wouldn't understand. I felt anger rising, but also compassion, a complex tangle of emotions that left me drained, yet strangely alive. Family, I realized, was never simple. Love was never simple. Forgiveness, understanding, reconciliation, they were mountains to climb, often blindfolded. And yet, I knew one thing, I would climb them. I had survived decades of mistakes, heartbreak, and loss. I could survive this. I could reach out, not just to Julian, but to Camille, and face the truths they had kept hidden. Because the alternate, turning away, letting silence fester, was worse than the cold, the pain, or the betrayal. I took a deep breath, feeling the icy winter air that had followed me here mingling with the warmer, musty scent of the church. My eyes rested on Julian, on the envelope, on the photograph. I understood that family was not about perfection. It was about persistence. It was about continuing to love, even when the ones you love hurt you, even when the truths you uncover are sharper than any winter wind. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. We remained there, in that fragile, suspended moment, listening to the soft creak of the pews, the whisper of the wind against the stone, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of reconciliation beginning to stir. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Hope that we could survive this. Hope that we could rebuild. Hope that Julian, Camille, and I could navigate the tangled threads of betrayal, secrecy, and love, and perhaps warmth together. The snow outside had thickened into a quiet, relentless storm, blanketing Strasbourg in a muffled hush. Inside the church, the warmth of candles flickered, casting long shadows across the stone walls, creating a cocoon of light and darkness that seemed to mirror the tangled emotions in my heart. Julian and I sat together, the envelope still between us, its contents heavy with revelations that demanded action, not just understanding. "Grandma," Julian whispered, breaking the silence again, "we need to see her. We need to confront Camille before this grows even worse, before more secrets are buried." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. The thought of facing my daughter filled me with both dread and determination. I had avoided confrontation for years, letting silence fester like a wound that never healed. But now, armed with these documents, I knew avoidance was no longer an option. We left the church together, the snow crunching under our boots, and made our way to Camille's apartment in the quieter, older part of the city. The streets were deserted, the storm creating a surreal world of white and shadow. I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation tighten in my chest with every step. Would she deny everything? Would she lash out? Or would she finally tell the truth? When we arrived, the door was slightly ajar. My heart jumped. I knocked gently, then louder, when there was no response. Finally, Camille emerged, her expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. She froze when she saw the envelope in Julian's hand. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. What is this?" I stepped forward, trying to maintain calm. "Camille, we need to talk. All of this," I gestured to the envelope, to the storm of documents, letters, and photographs. "We can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. Julian showed me everything, and I need to understand." Her eyes flashed, a moment of anger, then fear, then resignation. "You've seen it all," she whispered. She looked at Julian, her son, and for the first time I saw the vulnerability I hadn't expected. "I didn't want you to see it like this. I wanted to protect you. Protect me," I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Camille, hiding things doesn't protect anyone. It builds walls. It drives us apart. We're a family. We're supposed to face things together, not leave one another in the cold." Julian stayed silent, his gaze shifting between us, a silent reminder that his presence bridged the gap, forcing confrontation instead of avoidance. Camille took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears she fought to hold back. "Mom, I had no choice. The decisions I made about the inheritance, the finances, they weren't just for me. I tried to secure a future, a safety net. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt you, how much you'd feel betrayed." I felt a mix of anger and sorrow rise in me, memories of years spent trying to guide, support, and love her flooding back. "Camille, we've lived decades of silence, of assumptions, of unspoken fears. You think hiding the truth protects me? It doesn't. It isolates us. It leaves us in the cold, literally and emotionally." Her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope, almost as if it were a physical weight pressing on her conscience. "I was afraid, Mom. Afraid you'd judge me. Afraid I'd ruin our family's future. And I guess I was also afraid of myself." Julian stepped forward, his voice surprisingly firm for a 60-year-old mom. "Grandma needed to know. We needed to see this. Not to blame, but to understand. You can't carry it alone anymore." Camille's gaze softened, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, an acknowledgement of the pain her secrecy had caused. I didn't realize it had reached this point. I thought I was protecting you both, but I see now, I was wrong." I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift slightly from my shoulders. "Camille, family isn't about perfection. It's about surviving the mistakes, the misunderstandings, the betrayals, and still choosing to stay together. We've all been hurt. We've all made mistakes, but it's not too late to mend what's broken." The three of us stood there, in the midst of the storm and the apartment's quiet warmth, and for the first time, I felt a fragile sense of connection. Julian squeezed my hand gently, a reminder that we could face the storm together, that love, complicated, messy, and painful, still existed between us. Camille knelt, reaching for the letters and photographs, carefully placing them back in the envelope. I want to try, Mom. I want to fix this. I don't want Julian to feel lost. I don't want us to be lost." I nodded, my own tears slipping freely now. "We can't undo the past, Camille, but we can choose how we move forward. We can choose warmth over cold, honesty over secrecy, love over fear." The storm outside continued its relentless descent, snow piling against windows, muffling the city. But inside, something imperceptible had shifted. The weight of years of silence, secrecy, and misunderstanding began to lift, replaced by tentative hope. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe. Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. We sat together on the couch, the envelope between us, like a bridge spanning the chasm that had divided our family. Words were few, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, charged with the potential for healing. And in that quiet, I understood that the path ahead would not be easy, but it was possible. Julian looked at me, a spark of the boy I had known shining through his cautious eyes. Camille reached for my hand, a gesture of trust and reconciliation. And I, for the first time, in what felt like forever, felt the warmth of family, fragile but unbroken, seeping back into my bones. The days after our confrontation were quiet, almost deceptively so. Strasbourg had shed its storm, leaving streets glistening with icy remnants of snow and sunlight reflecting off frozen pavements. The city felt cleaner, sharper, more unforgiving. Yet inside, I sensed a fragile clarity beginning to settle over my family. Julian and I spent hours poring over the letters again, tracing the careful decisions Camille had made, piecing together timelines that had seemed scattered and incomprehensible before. But the envelope held more than financial documents and old letters. Tucked at the very bottom, beneath layers of yellowed paper, was another note I had not noticed before. Its edges were frayed, and the handwriting, delicate and almost hesitant, sent a chill down my spine. It was addressed to me, not Camille, not Julian, but to me. I unfolded it carefully, my hands trembling. To my mother-in-law, the woman who carried our family through storms of her own making. I am sorry for what I could not say while I was alive. There are truths that may shock you, but they must be known. Do not let anger blind you. Let understanding guide you. My heart pounded. My ex-husband gone for decades, writing to me from beyond the veil of his absence. Or perhaps he had left it intentionally for this moment, a carefully timed revelation. My mind raced, trying to imagine the truth he had hidden all these years. Julian leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. Grandma, what is it? What does it say? I shook my head, swallowing hard. I don't know yet, but it feels like the final piece, the part that explains everything. Over the next few hours, I carefully unfolded the layers of paper, piecing together a story I had never suspected. My ex-husband had left not only financial burdens but also secrets of family lineage and choices that had been deliberately hidden. Camille, as I now understood, had grown up carrying fragments of knowledge she had never fully shared with me, not out of malice, but out of survival, out of fear, and perhaps out of misguided protection. One photograph made me catch my breath. Camille, as a small child, standing with another woman I did not recognize. The resemblance was unmistakable, similar eyes, the same determined jawline, but this woman had not been mentioned in any family history I knew. My chest tightened as I realized that this was a half-sibling, a child my ex-husband had fathered, in secret, someone Camille had discovered years ago and had kept hidden. Fearing I would judge, or worse, reject her entirely, Julian looked at me, his eyes wide. Grandma, she never told you about that? I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, she couldn't, and I never suspected. I thought I knew everything about my own daughter's life. I thought I understood the choices she made. But this changes everything. The weight of betrayal pressed down again, heavier than before. But this time, it was tempered by clarity. The patterns that had seemed cruel and arbitrary were now legible, coherent in their own painful logic. Camille had hidden this secret not to hurt me, but to protect herself, and perhaps to protect the family from fracturing further. I rose from the chair where I had been sitting, clutching the envelope. Julian followed silently, sensing my need for movement, for action. We need to talk to her, I said. All of it. Nothing hidden this time. She deserves to know that she doesn't have to carry this alone anymore. We returned to Camille's apartment, the familiar route now filled with new anticipation. When she opened the door, I saw her hesitation immediately, the fear and hope battling in her expression. Mom, Grandma, what is it? She asked, her voice trembling. I held up the photograph. Camille, who is this? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she was speechless. Then, as if releasing a long-held breath, she began to speak. That, my half-brother, my father. He had him before I was born. I found out when I was 13. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought keeping it secret was protecting you, protecting us. I felt tears sting my eyes, but there was no anger. This time, only sorrow, empathy, and a deep understanding of the pressures she had faced. Camille, you didn't know how to navigate the truths of generations. We all made mistakes, but hiding it shaped us in ways we didn't understand. Julian too, all of us. Julian stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mom, it's not too late. We can face this now, together. Camille's tears fell freely now, and I realized how much pain she had carried, silently and alone. The half-brother she had hidden, the secrets of inheritance, the fear of judgment, all of it had been a burden far heavier than I could have imagined. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I embraced Camille, holding her close, and felt Julian hug both of us. The warmth seeping through layers of past mistakes, anger, and silence. The revelation had shocked us, threatened to break us, yet paradoxically, it also created a space for healing. We spent hours talking that night, confronting truths, asking questions, and sharing emotions long suppressed. The hidden truth, while painful, became a bridge between the fractured hearts of our family, a reminder that even in betrayal, even in secrecy, love could still survive. I realized, finally, that the cold I had felt so acutely, Julian's laughter, the distance, the silences had been both literal and metaphorical. The emotional frost had kept us apart, but truth, once uncovered, was the first warmth of spring after a long winter. And in that warmth, fragile and fleeting, I understood something essential. Family is never perfect. Love is never without fault, but understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to face truths, those are what sustain us across generations. The morning sun poured through the frost-lined windows of Camille's apartment, scattering light across the remnants of last night's confessions. The city outside hummed quietly, a distant reminder that life continued beyond our fragile bubble of truth and reconciliation. Inside, the air was warmer, not just from the heating, but from the tentative hope that had begun to grow between us. Julian was sitting on the windowsill, tracing patterns in the frost with his finger. I could see the weight of the past week in his eyes, but also a flicker of something new: responsibility, understanding, and a cautious optimism. He glanced at me, and for the first time in years, I felt he truly saw me, not as an authority figure or a victim of circumstance, but as a partner in navigating the complicated terrain of family. Camille moved quietly in the kitchen, making tea. Her movements were deliberate, almost meditative, as though she were grounding herself in the simple act of preparing warmth for all of us. The clink of the kettle, the soft bubbling of water, filled the silence with an ordinary comfort that had been missing from our lives for too long. I took a deep breath, letting the ordinary sounds anchor me, and spoke gently. Camille, yesterday, today, this week, it's been a lot, and I know I've said some things in the past that may have hurt you. I want you to know, I never intended to make you feel isolated or judged. I wanted us to face things together. She looked at me, her eyes glistening, and nodded slowly. Mom, I know, I've carried so many secrets, thinking I was protecting everyone, but I see now that in doing so, I built walls instead. Walls that hurt Julian, and walls that hurt you. I'm ready to tear them down. Julian finally spoke, his voice steady, despite the lingering tension. Mom, Grandma, we can't change the past, but we can start now. We can make different choices, together. And we can be honest, even when it's hard. I felt a lump in my throat. The clarity in his words, the maturity he showed despite his age, reminded me that even in the darkest winters, growth could flourish. He had witnessed betrayal, secrecy, and the fractures of generational pain, yet he still offered hope. We spent the morning revisiting the letters and photographs, not as instruments of judgment, but as tools of understanding. Each piece of paper was a story, a fragment of decisions made under pressure. Choices that had shaped the course of our family in ways both visible and hidden. We read them together, asked questions, and allowed ourselves to acknowledge emotions that had been suppressed for decades: sadness, fear, but also love, loyalty, and hope. At one point, Julian turned to me, a seriousness in his eyes that belied his youth. Grandma, I think we need to meet him, my half-brother. I want to know him. I want to understand him. And I think you should, too. My breath caught thought of confronting someone I had never met. A man who was both a stranger and family was terrifying, but I felt the pull of inevitability, the realization that healing required courage, even if that courage trembled beneath our ribs. You're right, I admitted softly. We need to face the full truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Camille reached for my hand, a gesture of solidarity. We'll face it together, Mom, all of us. Julian, you, me. It's time we stopped carrying secrets and started carrying each other. The words, simple yet profound, filled me with a mixture of relief and anticipation. For years, I had felt the cold of isolation, the sting of laughter that masked pain, and the silence that had driven wedges between us. Now, I understood that confrontation, honesty, and shared vulnerability were the bridges we had been missing. We agreed to write a letter to the half-brother, inviting him to meet us, to share stories, to bridge the gaps that had existed for decades. It was a small step, yet monumental in its emotional significance. Writing the letter was an exercise in humility and courage, acknowledging the past without blame, expressing curiosity without judgment, offering forgiveness without hesitation. Julian helped, suggesting words, phrases, and sentiments that reflected the heart of our family's journey. We don't want him to feel threatened, he said. We want him to feel welcome. And as I wrote, I realized something powerful. Family is not defined solely by blood or proximity. It is defined by presence, by intention, and by the willingness to face truths that shake us to our core. The envelope, once a symbol of betrayal and secrecy, had become a catalyst for growth, understanding, and emotional resilience. By evening, the letter was complete. Camille read it aloud, her voice steady, but tinged with emotion. Julian added a closing line that made us all smile. A small reminder that love and laughter could coexist with pain. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. We sealed the envelope together, a tangible symbol of our commitment to honesty, connection, and the willingness to face the unknown. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of equilibrium, a fragile balance between past hurt and present hope. As I watched Julian place the envelope on the table, I realized that the journey ahead would not be simple. Confronting the half-brother, navigating the complexities of Camille's choices, and rebuilding trust would require patience, empathy, and courage. Yet, for the first time, I believed it was possible. The warmth in the apartment contrasted sharply with the frost-laden streets. Outside, a metaphor for the transformation occurring within us. Where once there had been cold, isolation, and misunderstanding, there was now light, dialogue, and shared vulnerability. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of our small family, our voices, our laughter, the quiet rustle of papers wash over me. I felt a deep gratitude, not just for the revelations, but for the resilience that had brought us to this point. We had faced betrayal, secrecy, and generational pain, yet we were still here, together, choosing connection over isolation, truth over silence, and love over fear. And in that moment, I understood that healing is never instantaneous. It is a process, a series of steps taken together, with courage, patience, and heart. We were beginning that process now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of hope seeping into every corner of my being. The day of the meeting arrived with a crisp, clear morning. Strasbourg's streets were quiet, the air carrying a faint chill that hinted winter's persistence, but also a sense of anticipation. Julian, Camille, and I walked together toward a small cafe by the river, chosen deliberately for its neutral, public setting. We needed a space that felt safe, open, and yet intimate enough for what we were about to face. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Meeting someone you've never known, yet sharing a bloodline, is a surreal, almost paradoxical experience. The idea that our family's story could suddenly expand to include another person, someone whose existence had been hidden for decades, was both thrilling and terrifying. Julian kept close to me, his hand brushing mine occasionally, a silent anchor of support. Camille walked beside him, her face composed, but I could sense the storm of emotions swirling beneath her calm exterior: fear, anticipation, guilt, and hope all mixed together. When we arrived at the cafe, he was already there. The man rose. As we approached, tall, with an air of quiet composure. His eyes held the same intensity I recognized in Camille, yet softened by a lifetime of experiences we had only begun to imagine. He looked nervous, cautious, yet welcoming in a way that made my chest ache with relief and anxiety simultaneously. "Hello," he said, voice low but steady. "You must be my family." I nodded, extending a hand that he shook firmly. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm your step-grandmother. These are Camille and Julian." He took a seat, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension between past secrets and present reality palpable. Julian finally broke the silence. "We wanted to meet you, to know you, to understand you, and to start, if you're willing, building a relationship." The man nodded, swallowing hard. I've wondered about you for years. About Camille, about this family I never knew. I didn't know if you would even want me to exist in your lives." Camille reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "We do," she said simply. "It's complicated, yes, but we want to know you, to learn who you are, not just the secrets you carry." I felt tears prick my eyes. The words were simple, yet monumental. Generations of pain, misunderstanding, and secrecy were slowly unspooling, leaving a space for something new, something fragile but hopeful. He smiled faintly, a mix of relief and gratitude. I'm grateful. I never expected this. I feared anger, rejection, even hatred, but instead, you're offering connection." The conversation flowed cautiously. At first, each word weighed and measured, like stepping stones across a river too swift to trust. We spoke of Camille's childhood, the choices she had made to protect herself, the letters and documents my ex-husband had left, and the decades of absence and misunderstanding. With each revelation, the tension gradually softened, replaced by empathy and curiosity. Julian listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, bridging the gap between the past and present. "Do you know why my mom kept it a secret?" he asked gently. The man looked at Camille, his expression patient yet inquisitive. Camille exhaled slowly. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't know how my grandmother would react. I thought keeping it secret would protect her, and maybe myself." He nodded slowly, a soft understanding in his gaze. "I see now. Secrets have a way of shaping us, don't they?" "Yes," I whispered. "They can freeze us in the cold, if we let them, but if we face them, together, we can find warmth again." The conversation turned to memories, stories, and laughter, small bridges that helped connect our fragmented lives. Julian shared anecdotes from school and friends. Camille recounted moments of joy and fear, and I told stories of the past, stories that had been left untold for far too long. There were pauses, moments of tension, as we navigated the unspoken wounds that lingered in each of us, but slowly, a rhythm formed, a fragile harmony built from honesty and shared vulnerability. Finally, the man spoke, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I never thought I would be part of a family that truly wanted to know me, that wants to understand. I want that too. For all of us. For the years we lost." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "It's not too late. It's never too late to start, to learn, to heal. We can carry the past, yes, but we don't have to let it define our future." Julian smiled, a mixture of relief and hope lighting his face. "I want us to be a family," he said simply. "Not perfect, not without mistakes, but real, together." And in that moment, the weight of decades of silence, betrayal, and misunderstanding began to lift. The cold that had haunted our hearts, the laughter that masked pain, the secrets that had divided us was replaced by tentative warmth, fragile yet undeniable. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. As we left the cafe, walking along the riverbanks of Strasbourg, I felt the snow beneath our feet no longer as a chill, but as a symbol of resilience. Each step was a choice to move forward, to embrace truth, to nurture connection. Julian held my hand, Camille walked beside us, and the half-brother followed, tentative but present, a living testament to the power of courage, honesty, and forgiveness. We paused by the river, watching the sunlight glint on the water's surface, and I felt a deep, abiding gratitude. The journey had been painful, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in decades, I felt hope, love, and the enduring strength of family. In the presence of all three generations, I understood something essential. We are defined, not solely by blood, but by the choices we make, the truths we confront, and the courage to embrace one another, even after years of cold distance and hidden pain. And in that shared moment, I realized that warmth real, lasting warmth reals, possible, if only we dared to reach for it, together. The evening settled over Strasbourg like a soft blanket, the city lights reflecting off the slow-moving river, casting shimmering patterns across the snow-dusted streets. The air was crisp but no longer biting. It carried the scent of winter's remnants and the faint promise of spring. Inside Camille's apartment, the atmosphere was warm, infused with the quiet energy of a family learning to be together after decades of distance, secrets, and misunderstandings. Julian had gone to his room to work on school assignments. Though I knew his thoughts were still tangled in the whirlwind of revelations and emotions, Camille was tidying the kitchen, moving with a careful rhythm, yet occasionally pausing to glance at me, as if searching for reassurance that our fragile reconciliation was real. I sat on the couch, the half-brother across from me, sipping tea, and I realized how astonishingly surreal, yet profoundly grounding this moment was. I remembered all the winters I had spent feeling abandoned, laughed at, or excluded. I remembered the shiver of cold when Julian's youthful teasing had once pierced me deeply, the echoes of my daughter's silences, and the decades of unspoken fears that had accumulated in corners of my heart. And yet, here we were, sitting together, sharing warmth, presence, and stories that had been suppressed for far too long. I took a deep breath, letting the tension of the past dissolve slowly, acknowledging both the pain and the growth that had brought us here. You know, I said softly, addressing both Camille and her half-brother, life doesn't give us instructions. It doesn't tell us how to navigate betrayal, secrecy, or misunderstandings. We learn as we go. And sometimes, the lessons are harsh, painful, even shattering. Camille nodded, her eyes glistening. I know, Mom. I've felt that pain, and I've carried it in ways I thought would protect everyone. But I see now that protection without honesty only isolates us. Her half-brother, quiet until now, spoke carefully. I've spent years imagining what my family might have been like, and I feared rejection. I feared anger, disappointment. But sitting here, I feel something different. I feel acceptance, connection, and hope. I smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and understanding. That's what family is. Not perfection, not always comfort, but presence, effort, the willingness to face pain together, to embrace each other even after mistakes, even after betrayal, even after cold winters of the heart. We sat in a silence that was no longer heavy but contemplative. It was a silence filled with empathy, understanding, and the fragile courage of hearts beginning to heal. Julian returned from his room, carrying a notebook full of drawings and notes, his youthful energy mingling with the newfound maturity born from the past week's revelations. I wanted to show you something, he said, opening the notebook to reveal sketches of the family, small moments captured with care, and me walking by the river, Camille laughing as she tidied the kitchen, the half-brother sitting quietly with tea. Each sketch was infused with love, tenderness, and the subtle acknowledgement of our shared journey. I felt tears sting my eyes. Julian, these are beautiful. You've captured us, not as we are perfect, but as we are real. He smiled shyly. I wanted to show that even after everything, even after secrets and cold winters, we can still be together, warm, connected, and family. The half-brother reached out, placing a hand over Julian's. I want to be part of that warmth, of that family. I want to learn, to be present, to heal what's been broken. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and hope, tempered by the awareness that healing is ongoing, not instantaneous. The past cannot be erased, but it can be understood, acknowledged, and integrated into the living tapestry of family. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe. Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. Later, I sat by the window, gazing at the river's gentle flow. The snow outside had softened, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights, as though the world itself had shifted subtly in response to the transformations within us. I reflected on the journey we had endured, the cold, the laughter that masked pain, the decades of secrets, the confrontations, and finally, the tentative steps toward healing. I realized that life is full of winters, both literal and metaphorical. We face coldness in relationships, betrayal from those we love, and silence that separates us from understanding. But warmth is possible. It arrives not magically, but through courage, honesty, and the conscious choice to embrace connection. Even when it feels fragile, Camille joined me at the window, leaning gently on my shoulder. Mom, she said quietly, thank you for not giving up on us. even when we made it hard. I hugged her, feeling the strength of our shared resilience. And thank you, Camille, for trusting me with your truth. That trust, it is the foundation of everything we rebuild. Her half-brother came to stand beside us, placing his hand over ours, a tangible reminder that families are not only defined by the past, but by the choices we make together moving forward. The warmth in that small apartment, born from shared vulnerability, courage, and forgiveness, was a testament to the power of human connection. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the quiet, the presence, the fragile but undeniable hope, and I understood, deeply and fully, that life's greatest lessons often come through pain and confrontation, but also that love, connection, and warmth are always within reach, if we dare to seek them. For decades I had felt the cold of distance, betrayal, and misunderstanding, but now I felt the spring of human resilience, the embrace of family, and the enduring warmth of hearts willing to heal. And in that warmth, I found peace. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the quiet, the presence, the fragile but undeniable hope, and I understood, deeply and fully, that life's greatest lessons often come through pain and confrontation, but also that love, connection, and warmth are always within reach, if we dare to seek them. For decades, I had felt the cold of distance, betrayal, and misunderstanding, but now I felt the spring of human resilience, the embrace of family, and the enduring warmth of hearts willing to heal. And in that warmth, I found peace. Yet, as I looked at Camille, Julian, and her half-brother, I couldn't help but wonder how many of us let silence and fear create walls between the people we love. And what would happen if we finally chose to break them?